I'm not sure everybody's here yet, so
I looked for stuff in the.
But I'll start. we have enough time to secure a couple of these that I really want people to read. I'm gonna do a little teaching about some things that I see often enough in the stories and pieces I've read so far, that I'm just gonna explain it so that when you are editing,
There's
that everybody is kind of aware of the,
I was cleaning it.
if you will, the rules.
That's where I
As long
was
as-
sanitized. I'll read it. And I just saw there are pens up here.
Okay, so these are kind of going back to early writing rules. And when we've gotten kind of out of the habit, we forget them. So I know that this is a lot of glare. If shutting the screen, the shades on them,
So the unfortunate thing is,
they won't
once
have as
these,
much. Okay, all right, so I'm gonna explain, and I don't know if it'll make any difference if I move it, but I thought this shows to the majority right now. When you are writing and you are writing about people, if you refer to your parent by mom, dad, father, mother, mommy, whatever your name that you call that person, you capitalize that person as if that were its name, his or her name. So my mother's name was Irene. I did not call my mother Irene. I called her mom. My dad's name was Alfred or Al. I did not call him Al. I called him Dad. So when I am referring to somebody that is my name, like the person's name, I will use capital letters as if that person's name is used. The same is true if you have like an uncle or an aunt or a grandmother. My grandmother Bowman, my grandmother Boyles. That G is capitalized because that's a name like I used. I didn't use Mary. I didn't call them Margaret. I called them grandmother Bowman or grandmother Boyles. So when you're using a person's name, and I had it happen in most of your pieces, so I just thought I would clarify. If you refer to them more generically, like you're just talking about my mom, my dad, my uncle, then you do not capitalize. You just simply like the mothers in the room.
I made that mistake all the time.
Yeah, it's one of those that I'm just drawing attention to because it happened in most of the pieces I read. So I just wanted to clarify that just as a basic thing for you to edit for. And since we won't be meeting next week, it's Good Friday, you'll have 2 weeks that you can go through what you've written so far and be thinking about how you might change something. And if those are things you've done, then you might correct those. The second one is a revision. It's not editing as much as it is looking at what I've written and can I make it better. Now, this is more of a proofreading type problem. And this is, and I don't know if it makes any difference if I scoot this over for you to see it. It's just that I'm not sure if there's too much glare. Is there any glare on it so you can't see? No? Okay. So verbs, the best thing to remember is the two parts of a sentence have to have a subject and they have to have a verb. If there is no verb, it's not a complete thought. It's not a complete sentence. We a lot of times use what we call fragments to kind of punctuate, or like several of you use it, and it's really okay. It's a style thing. But you don't want a whole paper full of stories, content that has no verbs in it. But what we typically do is we use the words is, are, am, was, were, be, well, be is not so much, but being and have been. Well, those words are weak. They don't have a lot. Go ahead. I'm just teaching a little bit. If you can go through and check to see how many of those you have, see if you cannot eliminate them. Go into the sentences and see, is there another verb there? A word that could be turned into a verb? Now, I just spent this morning working on a project, and while I was teaching, I was substituting, and one of the English teachers yesterday had given the kids an assignment while I was in her classroom. I don't know if you remember The Tale of Two Cities, but it starts out with it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, it was the this of the time, and it was that of the time. It's got like 6 parallels of contrasts. And she said, I want them to rewrite it so they get rid of all the forms of be. Is, are, was, were, be, being, been. Well, when you did that, it changed the content so much that it was weird. And it was hard to do, to keep with what the meaning said and keep the strength of it. But like she and I were talking this morning, you use a rule, you break a rule to be emphatic and to show something, but you've got to know to do it differently most of the time. So in many of your pieces, it's kind of it's a form that we just get in the, she was a grandmother, she was a cook, she was of such and such. And that form of be, it gets you to, it's a complete sentence. But what it happens when you say, she baked the best pies. She sewed the straightest stitches. He dug the best ditches. The action puts the punch on the person who's doing it. It strengthens the sentences. So in a lot of cases, you can you can edit and go back in there and revise sentence structure to get it stronger by looking and just going, okay, I'm going to take a marker or a pencil and I'm going to go around every one of these words. Can I fix this sentence without just making it weird? Does it just throw it all completely off? But some of the things that I read, I thought, if you turn the sentences around and you found the person who was actually doing the action, or you found the thing, the event that they were talking about, you could probably rewrite the sentence and come up with a stronger verb. So this is just something to keep in mind. You might not be able to get it all done in this group, but if you continue to write, you might find that this might be helpful. And then the other one I was going to mention is use a name. Like if you have a grandmother, use her name. If you have a niece, use her name. If you go to a particular place, use the name. It will help orient the person who's reading it so they have a better sense of where you are, what you're doing. If it's a thing, what is it? Now, you might have to explain what a conventional washing machine is. You might have to explain what a single tree is. You might have to explain you give me a car part and I would have to have somebody explain it to me because I'm clueless. But the idea is the thing that you are using might need some explanation, but use it anyway, because the reader will benefit from having that word used. You're in a culture where you're in transition. You're writing to a group of people, potentially people younger than you are, maybe people who have no idea what you went through. How many people know what a head gate is? Well, if you grew up around agriculture, you probably know that. But if you didn't, who knows? A head cut. What's a head cut? What's a washout? Those are all words that are just so common or so much a part of our language that you don't even think anybody needs to have you explain it. But when I was writing about it in my book, I'd have people say, well, what is that? And I literally spent an entire chapter explaining how to read a plat in terms of, the northeast of the northwest and, the quarter and, all that kind of stuff. I wrote a whole chapter about it. And I remember one of the people in my session said, I never understood that. I get it. And I thought, well, that made me really happy. It wasn't the most dynamic and exciting piece I'd ever written, but it would explain something that was necessary. That's useful information. So keep that in mind as you are doing these, being really precise. And then the other thing I'll note, and this just has to do with the structure of writing, when you are writing nonfiction, like letters or documents, a lot of times the things that I write for classes, I will put it in block form. But when you're writing narratives and you're writing, you need to indent it. There are some structural instructions if you decided you wanted to publish that are like at the very beginning, they'll tell you to drop the page down halfway down the page. And there's a block form on the first paragraph, and they sometimes talk about the letters that you have. But for the most part, instead of using the double spacing or, and I know that a lot of it is the computer has just taken charge of your life, but indent your paragraphs so that you just hit the tab and it automatically will move it in 5 spaces. That is your document. That is your method of showing the paragraph breaks. And I always, because I don't like having these automatic things, I take all the automatic stuff off and get rid of it, because the only thing I don't take off is just a reminder that I misspelled something. I can go back and look. But I find that helpful, but I don't want it doing it for me, because if I'm writing a poem, sometimes the thing that I've written, I want it to look like the way I wrote it. So I don't want it taking over. I want it to be what I want it to be. But just to be mindful of your paragraphing, to use the indentation to write. So these are just kind of little basic things that hopefully will be.
I did it wrong.
Well, you
We
know
all did. I'm
what?
looking at everybody's, they're all done.
I think what made me say all this is it took a while, and part of it was I wasn't seeing your papers. Some people had read them and I couldn't see what was there. And so a lot of it is, if you can't see it, you don't know it's there. And so today, this week when I was reading through them, that's when I be more mindful of that's what some of it was happening. But I had to see them, and not all of them have been handed to me for me to read. So I didn't know that was necessary. It wasn't until I'd seen a bunch of them that I thought, well, I need to mention it to you. So all right. So that's
Well, I want to thank you for that. It has been so long since I've been in school. I don't know where to use a comma, where to use a semicolon.
Well, and with the semicolons and the commas, a lot of these, when people are getting them back, I am kind of editing, giving them that back. There are some, for the most part, my advice to you about commas is mostly don't use them. If you think you have to take a breath, forget it. Don't put the comma in there just because you had to breathe. If you had to breathe when you were reading it, maybe it's a revision of the sentence to say it is too long. But for the most part, there are some certain basic rules of commas that I can share with you maybe next time. But semicolons, they are what they call a strong period. And it means you did not use a conjunction like and or but or for or yet. You are putting two thoughts together saying, reader, figure out the relationship. Sometimes it's a contrast, sometimes it's a similar, or it's parallel, but that semicolon is a dot and a comma because you're saying, I'm jamming these two things together without a conjunction. That's the idea behind it. A colon, the two dots, you're going.
Well, I kind of know that.
And when you get to the colon, whatever follows the colon is explaining what you said already. It's like the clarification in another form. But for the most part, I just, we can end up getting way too many commas. There are some that I've made some modifications on. And my habit sometimes when I don't like what I'm doing is I use a dash, and I am on dasher, on dasher, on dasher. So I get too many dashes. But so let me think. All right, so last week, I'm losing track because I really want you to hear at least a part of Sam's story that he read, that he didn't have time to read last week, because when I got it, I just thought, you guys will love this. It's a little long, so I asked him see if he could cut parts of it or read a part of it. But you will love this story. And I will mention, as I wrote on here, my mother's youngest sister was quite a traveler. And Aunt Edna had 6 kids, and they loved to fish. And all I can think of as I'm reading through this, I envisioned my Aunt Edna, her husband, and her 6 kids going up all kinds of places in this red, kind of tomato red and white Volkswagen van. And when he was writing about the van in here, that wasn't what the main story was. All I could visualize was Aunt Edna and these kids. It kind of was like one of those cartoons that you see all the kids hanging out the window. So anyway, do you have your copy?
I don't.
Okay, well, I will let you pick how you want to do that one, and then I've made comments on it. And then I would like to make sure that I'm not omitting anyone that did not read last week, and I think it was Dave. Dave, did you read last week?
No.
She didn't read last week either.
But Meredith did not read, so I want to make sure we have enough time for the ones that did not have a chance. Oh, and Jim, I read this. This is really good. I want them to, I'd love to have them here. Well, if we have time. I'd really like to have them hear this one. He had quite an adventure in an ice flow. That was pretty dramatic. So anyway, but I do want us to hear some of Sam's story. And he had written about his grandmother, and I thought maybe I might have time to read that, but we'll see how it goes. So, but he has, the reason I'm kind of jumping around is some of what I'm asking you to write now is beginning to clarify. I have a prompt about place and people, and I realize that in so many ways you're already doing that. So it's a case of just accumulation. You're adding more to your story about the same kinds of things, just a different story. So if it feels like, oh, I got this prompt and I already did this, well, you really didn't do it because you've got more to say. So you might have, or you might just decide, I want to revise this. So, all right. I love this. This is great. Okay, so Sam, do you want to take it away?
Sure. This was the heirloom project, writing thing that we did is how I got to start on it. But it involves a little family history and stuff, and I just titled it, My Family Gets Bugged. My pop bought a brand new ragtop sunroof Volkswagen Bug in the summer of 1958. It cost him $2,800. Not cheap by any means, but he had just gotten his first job teaching in Haley, Idaho, after graduating from the University of Idaho with a degree in mathematics, and he wanted to reward himself. His new job would start the following September. He needed a car to take him to his new job. He had always wanted an MGTC, an English-built two-seater convertible with open-flared fenders. He dreamed of buying one when he graduated high school in 1953, but the draft for the Korean War took him to Germany for a couple of years, delaying his plans for college. He saved every penny he earned, planning on buying that MG when he would get his first job after graduation from the university. Sadly, when he was in a position to buy his beloved MG, they were no longer being manufactured. Upset, with a handful of cash and deciding he would get an economical, dependable car, he was going to be a teacher after all, and not making a lot of money, he decided to buy the Bug. He would treat himself a little and get one with a sunroof rather than the plain old hardtop. I don't know why he didn't opt for the convertible. I would have liked that better. He had to go to Spokane, Washington to buy the Bug. Moscow didn't have a VW dealership in town. He also bought an engagement ring for a young woman he had met while at the university. She had earned a degree in English and hoped to be an English teacher like her mother. He drove his shiny new black Beetle to Mullen, Idaho, where his heart's fancy lived with her parents. He proposed, and she said, "No, I can't marry you. Your last name is Humphrey, and my parents can't stand Hubert Humphrey. They would never let me marry someone named Humphrey." Heart sunk, head hanging low, Curtis climbed into his shiny new black Beetle and drove home to his parents' house in Moscow, Idaho. A few weeks later, he packed all his worldly possessions into his shiny new black Bug and drove to Haley, Idaho, where he found an apartment and started his teaching job. In the spring of '59, he found a job teaching math at the high school in Maui, Hawaii, starting the following autumn. He had been writing letters to his heart's desire all year, and he wrote a marriage proposal to her as soon as he had been awarded the position in Maui, with a promise of a year-long honeymoon in Hawaii. They got married in Osborne, Idaho, at her parents' new home that June. Her mother, still not happy that her only daughter was marrying a Humphrey, even if he wasn't related to Hubert. They left the reception in the not quite shiny new black Bug, several strings of tin cans dragging behind, and "Just Married" sprayed in shaving cream over several places on the little car. Curtis was happy, his girl by his side in a special car on the way to celebrate their wedding night at a hotel in Spokane. Miriam, his new wife, was crying, happy tears, he supposed. In August, the newlyweds flew to Maui. Curtis had his freshly painted shiny black Beetle shipped to Maui. Freshly painted? Yes, the shaving cream had eaten into the paint and left slightly rusting phrases of "Just Married" in several places. Curtis's brothers paid for the new paint job. The Bug looked as good as new. It was again the brand new shiny black Beetle, and now it was on a big ship headed to Hawaii. The Bug made it to Maui safe and sound. Curtis and Mimi drove it all over the island. They drove it to the top of Haleakala and camped in the caldera for the weekend. That's where I was conceived, although they didn't know it at the time. In June 1960, Curtis, Mimi, and the still shiny black bug moved back to Moscow, Idaho. Curtis got a job substituting in the Moscow School District for the following school year. Mimi was pregnant, took care of their little apartment, and gave birth to their firstborn, me, in January 1961. Curtis got a job teaching high school for the U.S. Army brats in Nuremberg, Germany for 4 years. The new job would start the following September. The U.S. Army offered to help buy a new car for Curtis rather than ship his still shiny black bug to Europe and back. Curtis sold his bug to his dad and the promise that he would buy it back upon a return to the States. The deal was done, and the young family flew to Germany in August of 1961. In Germany, the young couple bought a 1960 VW camper bus from the factory in Wolfsburg. They drove that rig all over Europe the next 4 years. They had 2 daughters while in Nuremberg, and the little bus made a very comfortable camping van, except for the last summer in Europe. Mimi's mother flew to Germany and accompanied the young family on their European travels. They managed to work out all their issues, even if it wasn't all smiles all the time. Imagine 3 adults and 3 children under the age of 5 traveling Europe in a VW microbus. In the summer of 1965, Curtis was transferred to the high school on the Army base just outside of Tokyo, Japan. The Army shipped the microbus to Moscow, Idaho. Curtis got to drive his shiny little black bug during that summer. He was happy to be in that little car again. His father was taking good care of it. Neither the bug nor the microbus went to Japan. We were in Japan for a school year. A 4th child was born there in January, a girl. In the summer of 1966, the family moved to Spokane, Washington, where Curtis had been hired by the Spokane Community College system. Curtis and Mimi had decided Spokane would be a good place to raise their family, and it was equally close to her parents in Osborne, Idaho, and his parents in Moscow. Let's see, I can skip some of this because it's not bad.
I'd love to have you describe the driving of the family, the kids learning to drive.
Yeah, I'll skip to that part. Because what I did is I just have some stuff where I talk about my grandparents not liking the bug, so they bought my mom a car instead of a Volkswagen. Anyway, let's see. Okay, let's see. In 1973, my grandfather, Curtis's father, died. He had willed the shiny little black bug back to my pop. Let's see. In the summers now, Curtis would load a canoe on top of the shiny little black bug and drive it up to Indian Creek Campground on Priest Lake. And then let's see. I learned to drive on all those roads in that shiny little black bug. Heidi and Heather, the next 2 sisters, learned to drive that shiny little black bug there as well. Curtis drove that little car to his work every day during the school year. I took my driving test in that shiny little black bug in January 1977. In the summer of 1977, we moved to Seattle, Washington. Curtis received a sabbatical to take astronomy classes at the University of Washington. The shiny little black bug came with us. I was allowed to drive it to school every day as long as I took my sisters to school as well. Heidi was a year behind me, so went to the same school I did, Sammamish. But Heather was in junior high, a school a mile away or so. I loved driving that shiny little black bug every day. I even talked my pop into letting me put ski racks on it and take it up to the ski hills that winter. It felt like it was my car, and I fell in love with it. My pop took the bus into the U District, so he didn't need the car. The summer of '78, we moved back to Spokane. My pop needed that little black bug for his work again, and I lost my car. I still took care of it, though. I had learned how to service it, change the oil, plugs, points and condenser, learned how to adjust the timing, the valves, and the carburetor. Pop let me take care of his shiny little black bug because it was good for the car and it saved him money. Heidi got her driver's license in August of 1978. She got it driving that shiny little black bug. She had learned to drive that car on the same dirt roads in North Idaho that I had. She loved driving that little black bug too. Our pop decided Heidi would need her own car for driving to her job at Joanne Fabric and to school. He asked me to find a good bug for her. Then I just went on about getting a car for her. That was a bug. It ended up being a bug. In 1980, Heather took her driving test in Pop's shiny little black bug. He started driving that little car on the back roads. She started driving that little car on the back roads north of Spokane under Pop's instruction a couple years previous. By the time she could get her driver's license, She could drive proficiently, better than Heidi anyway. Heather liked the shiny little black bug, but her dream car was an MGB, canary yellow, her preferred color. By this time I was in the Navy. I bought a 1956 bug, but I had completely restored my bug to original condition, except for the engine and transmission, which I had replaced with a tranny from a 67 bug and a 1600cc dual port head with dual carburetor engine from a 1970 bug. Oh, that's more of that stuff. In 1982, it was our baby sister's turn to get her driver's license. And you guessed it, she took Pop's somewhat shiny little black bug in to get it. She hadn't had as much practice driving that bug as I did, nor as much as Heidi or Heather, but she still passed her driving test. By now, this poor little bug having been driven all over the western United States and gone through the punishment of 4 young people learning how to drive a stick shift automobile with an unsynchronized first gear, was in need of some restoration. First gear had lost a tooth or two, the engine was tired and burned a little oil. The odometer showed over 390,000 miles.
Wow.
I had read about bugs with over 1 million miles on them, but those had been one-owner cars meticulously maintained and carefully driven by their loving owners. Pop's not so shiny anymore little black bug had been used, abused, ridden hard, and put away wet too many times. Pop and I had done our best to keep the service, but a machine can only take so much, and even with care, they wear out. Then I go on about rebuilding it a little bit and stuff.
But one of the things that I've enjoyed about this is just what he gets to he describes at one point in their car parking lot of their house. There was a shiny little black bug. I don't know what color yours was.
It was white.
And it was ragtop? Is that?
Yeah,
no,
it was a convertible, yeah.
convertible. Then there was a ragtop and there was a yellow one. So there were 4 bugs in their driveway. And now, they read the last paragraph, Sam.
Okay, the last paragraph. I taught both my kids to drive that shiny little black bug. My sister Heather taught 2 of her little children to drive in that car. It was becoming a family legacy. Because of that shiny little black bug, most of Pop's grandchildren love the old bugs and microbuses. They all want to keep that car running and in the family. A couple years ago, my Pop realized he was too old to drive that shiny little black bug anymore. He asked me if I would like to have it. It is parked in my carport under a cover. When my daughter and son come to visit, they look forward to driving that car. It has become a lasting part of our family history.
I really enjoyed the saga of the black bug.
Oh, yeah.
I
Cars
had
have
a
that.
car that was a victim of the shaving cream, like you mentioned.
Oh, yeah.
Yikes.
Well, I thought he did a great job of traversing the world with this little black bug. It
Yeah.
really it entertained me, but it was also a really good way to cover people, places, and a thing.
Uh-huh.
And so, yeah, it was really well covered. So who wants to go next? Who feels like they would like to be heard and haven't been heard yet? So Dave read his a while back, and I wondered, do you want this one that I critiqued, or do you want to read the new one that I just got? She just printed it off for me, so.
I can read the new one.
Okay, and I might have to, again, we'll just kind of have part of it because I want to make sure I've heard, because Lois didn't get to read last time, and hers was really fun. It was about her excursion to Europe. That's a 20-something-ish,
17-year-old.
17-year-old. Okay, so I was right, it was a teenager. And yeah, that was also quite an adventure. So I want to hear from you, whether it's this one or whether you read something else, but let's hear from Dave, and then because I want to make sure I'm not focusing on just one person, and Meredith and Gladys, all of you have something to read, so. Okay, and when you get done, if you did not get to read, if you will give them to me, I will read through them and give you critiques, which I have on pretty much everybody so far that I've gotten. So, and names, it would be helpful to have a name on the paper.
Oh, sorry about that.
Yeah, well, it's kind of.
That one's easy to identify with the large print.
Well, mostly, but yes, okay, so just keep in mind, names are good. Okay, so Dave, you're gonna start with this one, thinking? Okay.
When thinking about people, family that were greatly influential in my growing up. Three people immediately come to mind. Ruth M. Voss, my mom's sister, 7 years younger, who we knew as Aunt Ruth. Ina M. Erickson and Carl T. Erickson, mom's mom and pop. We knew them as grandma and grandpa. Dad's mom died when he was 16, and his dad died a couple of months after I was born, so we never knew his parents. Aunt Ruth married the longtime bachelor uncle of our next door neighbor, Hank Voss. We knew as Uncle Hank, changing her name from Erickson to Voss. Oddly enough, fitting her to a T. Indeed, she was a boss in everything, having a strong opinion of everything and frequently expressed it avidly. It was my way or the highway, which with her. She was 14 when I was born and immediately became an important part of our family, pouring herself into each of our lives. In spite of being quite bossy, we really looked forward to spending time with her and hoping she would come over. Our family never owned a car, but Aunt Ruth would frequently come over. She would spend hours telling Mom all the latest news or gossip. Us kids would quietly listen within earshot, but not too close. You see, children were to be seen, not heard. It was not uncommon for Aunt Ruth to suddenly pull in the driveway and stroll into the house and spontaneously announce, "How about some ice cream?" So we all would pile into her car, pajamas and all, and head to the A&W drive up. And the car hop would bring out frosty tall glass mugs filled with root beer and topped with a generous blob of ice cream floating on top. Oh, what a treat. Other times she would show up with a bag of Big Boy burgers, or what a rare feast. Other times it would be an evening of hundreds of slides with popcorn and Kool-Aid as we were sprawled on her living room floor. It was always a special time when Aunt Ruth came over, or we would go for a ride with her. She was a special part of every family event. She and Uncle Hank were only married a couple of months when he was killed in a tragic car accident, leaving Aunt Ruth very bitter as a widow the rest of her life.
Let me ask this question, because it looks like you go on to talk about some of the things that she did, or they did together, your dad and your uncle, et cetera. With this paragraph where it's talking about her being married to him and dying, would that be better placed after some of the other adventures and events? Just because you're going to go on to talk about, I mean, I'm just pausing this.
You're right, it's out of place.
I just wondered if, just looking at the fact that you're still talking about her and her husband.
Because I do talk next about.
Okay, why don't you read another couple of paragraphs, Dave, and then we can go from there. She and her.
She and Uncle Hank orchestrated our one and only family vacation, renting a cabin in Wisconsin. A very eventful time, including fishing from a boat and viewing the chain of lakes. Dad and Uncle Hank, not knowing what they were doing, chasing bears out of the garbage cans, running after them with the garbage can lids Soon after Uncle Hank died, my cousin Hal was born.
Okay, now, I'm gonna just mention, at this moment, if they're running after the bears with the can lids,
The can
and then you
lids.
promptly say soon after Uncle Hank died, it
Oh.
kind of,
Oh.
Oops.
it might be better to put that detail a little bit later. My cousin Hal was born certainly after this vacation, might be more. So I'll let you finish, but just be aware that sometimes our placement of details can be sort of
Yeah.
accidentally funny. Okay,
It,
yeah, just
my
start soon
cousin
after.
Hal was born, Mom took care of him and raised him as part of our clan. Aunt Ruth was very special because she was always there for us, pouring herself into our lives, hearing and actually talking to us kids. Ina M. and Carl T. Erickson, we knew as grandma and grandpa, were also very influential in our family. Growing up, they were both Swedish immigrants, meeting at the age of 16 as they came off the ship in the Chicago harbor. They decided it would be better to live the American dream together. They went through the rigorous task of learning English, going through citizenship classes, and become American citizens. While working at Ryerson Steel, enduring long hours, raising a family, and moving to a far west suburb of Downers Grove, buying a house with 10 acres and raising a family in a house we knew as Grandma and Grandpa's house.
Okay, I'm gonna stop here because, so far, what do you hear in his piece? Can you give him some feedback about what you just heard him read? Besides my couple of comments, because I got to read ahead, you didn't see those things, so. What are some observations or comments about what you heard him read?
I like the description of his Aunt Ruth arriving in her car with whatever treats or whatever she had in mind.
Yeah,
Trip to the, I like the description of Boston. That's where our family is.
yeah, so the description of your aunt, focusing in on the qualities that she had is really what brings it to life. The things that she did that make her influential, or being kind of the big boss, that's positive. That's a key part of this. Other thoughts about what he includes here?
So Sam was talking about his cars, and that made me think, oh, it'd be great for a prompt because almost everybody has a car story, but this is the second time I think in Dave's stuff that maybe it was what I helped him type last week. I can't remember.
Yes.
He was talking about a car.
Yeah.
But it's really interesting because it makes me think of my dad's Jeep.
Yeah,
That might be a good place to insert more information about the car to elaborate on.
yeah, I was gonna mention that I had the opportunity to read a piece that Dave had written last week about his experience when the events that changed his life. And I don't think I'm being, if he's putting it out here on these pieces of paper, then it becomes a little bit more public knowledge. But he commented on the fact that when he was growing up, their experience in his family, they did not have a lot of money. And it was difficult because you talked about going to school and the whole idea that the lack of money put you in a different place. Kids viewed you differently. The fact that your aunt shows up to take you to A&W and brings the hamburgers that you mentioned it's a real treat. If you were putting these things together, Dave, that piece that you wrote for last time and this time you could weave them together because they're talking about something where the experiences blend, all right? Your aunt was unique because she had obviously enough money that she could take you to the A&W where your parents weren't doing that.
Yes.
And that kind of thing, just as a detail that you can incorporate, is one of the things that you might mention. It makes me think of Lois's story about her aunt who had plenty of money but gave strange Christmas gifts. You know, it's
The thought.
but it's the thing that makes that person influential. And so you might think about those kind of ways to take what you've written already and weave it together. Other thoughts about what he's doing in this particular story that, or piece that you've just finished reading? Other comments or observations about either what he might do to, like she mentioned, put more detail about the things like the car, but are there other things that that you would want to have him maybe think about?
I kind of wondered too what her job was or what she did if she had a little more money.
Okay.
Just kind of that came
The
to mind.
end, yeah.
Just
Okay.
describe her because we got to the point where she lost her husband.
Right.
So there's a lot to be
Okay.
expanded on in that with her.
Other,
One of the things I noticed that he mentioned was that she was bitter after that. But did it change her habit of doing things for other people?
I'm sorry.
I say, you mentioned in there that when she lost her husband, she
Yes.
was bitter.
Yes,
But did that change her from still doing things for the family?
she still poured herself into us kids. Our family was very difficult because my dad was very unapproachable and there was a lot of abuse, and Aunt Ruth knew it, and she specifically poured herself into trying to help us kids and actually talking where most of us had nobody to talk to.
okay, that's a really important thing, and since I can look at this paper that they don't have to look at, you talk about that point, that you introduce that at the end of a paragraph. After mom, Hal was born, mom took care of him and raised him as part of our clan. Aunt Ruth was always very special to us because she was always there for us. That paragraph, that piece should probably be in its own paragraph. And then like Edie said, that this characteristic was something she already did, but she stayed with doing that. You might want to put all that in a paragraph by itself.
Yeah, because I thought, oh no, she's so bitter, she's not gonna do any of that stuff
Yes.
anymore. But I think if you, you could mention that she was hurt and bitter, but she still kept up her.
Yeah, I think that, and I was gonna mention too, you've got several more pages of talking about your grandparents as influential people, but if you're focused on your aunt, I would not put that section about your grandparents on the same, it's almost like a little second chapter. You can
Yes.
separate it into another story,
So
okay?
maybe just do.
Just
it all
focus on
that
her,
one end.
yes,
Yeah.
focus on her and how she helped you, what she did to make it better for you.
That's what I was thinking with this project, and that actually came up a couple weeks ago, but I didn't mention it. If people would fit into their own chapters within this life story, you talk about like
Yeah.
my Uncle Leroy and what I knew about him and then sort of his timeline, and then
And I-
grandma and grandpa, and then at the end kind of weave some of those stories together. And it's hard to naturally
And it's hard to do it in 8 weeks.
yeah.
It's just little bits. But what I did notice in something that Meredith had done, and her pieces, there's one that's quite long that talks about her whole history, her family going clear back to Russia. And my thought was, in order to really kind of cover that part of it was, she has done a lot of research. So it would be useful at the beginning of something you're writing, if you are doing research, to introduce your section about your heritage with a little bit of a background of where did I get this information? This is a starting point for my story. I include a little paragraph at the beginning of that says, what I researched this family by going to these places or to these sources, and I found that, and she makes a really sort of amusing, but maybe not so much statement that I thought was a really relevant one for the whole of this. She said, "I have always thought my Funk family invented dysfunctional family dynamics." But she also mentions later in something about the PTSD.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, well, it's almost a case of the dysfunctional family and the PTSD that was not diagnosed ended up being a DNA genetic trait. It almost carried through from the family. So in that opening, whether it's about your family or your history about where you grew up, where is this information coming from? And how do you figure into it at the very beginning and then bring those other characters, other story people into the process?
I want to say one more thing too, because I forget, but there is a gal that we have her phone number that offers genealogy help here.
Yeah, and I
It's
would,
listed on Friday activity, I think, but we can get a hold of her.
say that might be something to think about kind of after this project.
Right.
I wouldn't try to layer it in there right now, because you've got a lot to work with in just a short amount of time to do it.
Yeah.
So, I'm gonna give that back, because I think you read part of it last time, didn't you?
I summarized it because
Yes.
it was so long.
It was, yeah, but it's very interesting. And yeah, there were some really interesting situations there. So with that in mind, Dave, I think there are some things you could do to focus on your aunt, and then do another little subchapter, subpoints that have to do with your grandparents and the influences that they had. I think you definitely have to talk a little bit about, because you do kind of allude to it in your first piece, about the difficulty of living with your dad and the poverty that you felt when you were in your, because were you at Downers Grove? Was that where you were?
I,
Grew up?
grandma and grandpa lived in Downers Grove. We were in Downers Grove till kindergarten, then, at first grade, because we lost our house in
Right.
Downers Grove, had to move to Wheaton, and that's.
You were in the
realized we were-
Chicago area, and that's
Yes.
why, but in that story, I gathered that there was financial difficulties. All right, so where do I go next? Who wants to, I think Lois, did you say Jim was gonna? Well, I would like to have Jim read, but we didn't get you last time, and so I would like you to read whatever you want to this time.
Okay. 1968, what a year. There I was, all of 17 years old and boarding the biggest airplane I'd ever seen, taking the first flight of my life and headed toward a South-planned 6-week tour of Europe with only my cousin, Rita, as my traveling companion. Unlike my siblings who had been away from home and to attend music camps or weeks of summer-long excursions with their friends over the years, I'd earned my reputation as a homebody, and it seemed like I'd eventually be the one who was left behind to care for mom and dad in their old age. Yet here I was going off on a once-in-a-lifetime adventure in my teen years. Going to Europe right after high school had been the brainchild of my cousin Rita, who first floated the idea while we were both kids in middle school. It was more of a pipe dream than a credible plan at that time. But soon we were saving money and taking foreign language classes, which made the dream seem more substantial and believable. Shy and sheltered as I was, I suspected my parents were just playing along, smirking to themselves, as Rita and I studied our Europe on $5 a day Bible and talked about all we'd see as world travelers. Bragging about our grandiose plans to friends and family was good fun, but in truth, the thought of making the trip got more worrisome as for me each year. But then what parents are going to let their sheltered daughters loose in Europe right after high school? I calmed myself knowing my mom and dad would put their foot down at some point and provide an easy excuse for me to back out without losing face with my cousin Rita. As it turned out, however, if Dad had any reservations about our trip, he kept them quiet. He had himself joined the Navy as soon as he could after high school and had never regretted being on his own at an early age. And Rita's mom, my Aunt Kathleen, was a worldwide career woman who always encouraged her kids to explore life's challenges. She was also on board. More importantly, as the older sister, she was able to chide and put pressure on my mom, finally bringing her into the fold of supportive parents wishing their daughters bon voyage. What had I gotten myself into? Because of the million questions that assailed me those last months of high school, Graduation went by in a blur. What should I pack? How would I carry all the stuff I had needed to bring along? How would I get from one place to another? If I lost my passport or my wallet, what if our plane crashed in the ocean? Perhaps my most persistent worry was that I was born with no sense of direction. I have been known to lose my way going around the block. Yet here I was flying to another part of the world where I was unfamiliar not only with the languages, currencies, and customs they might expect us to observe, but I would also have to get from country to country, 9 in all as we planned, with no innate sense of direction. I imagined us spending all 6 weeks just looking for our first youth hostel. Shortly after settling in the plane seat, we noticed a nice guy about our same age sitting just a few seats away. He caught us looking at him and jutted his jaw at the empty seat next to ours, as if asking if he could join us. Duh. Also a recent high school graduate, and he not only was tackling Scotland on his own, but he was oozing with confidence. We compared notes on where we were headed and spent the rest of the flight trading plans and learning from each other. Getting on the plane, we were two scared little girls, too proud.
Too proud to admit our fears, but we got off the plane loaded down with new energy and the determination to return to the U.S. with triumphant stories. Did our basic language skills often find us wondering what people were trying to tell us? Were we mistakenly directed to the women's room when we thought we were asking the location of a famous German church? Did we get plastered enough on Spanish champagne that we had to sleep it off on a park bench? And did we get lost? Oh, yes. Yes, many times. But we also found our way. We learned we could make friends in any language, get where we wanted to go by asking enough questions, sleep on overnight trains to save money on youth hostels, and stretch our money thin enough that we were able to purchase souvenirs to give each family member upon our return. The confidence that grew in both of us during the 6-week trip made my next challenge of that same year, heading off to college at MSU with 40,000 other students, seem exciting rather than scary, and finding new friends, something I now look forward to. Yes, 1968, what a year.
Oh, very good.
So what are thoughts as you listened to that account? Keep in mind, she was 17 years old.
I know.
She's pretty brave. I would have never done it. I'd have chickened out. I'd have thought, I'll never get back home.
I would have, but my cousin put pressure on me and pride.
It's good recall of what would be an important time in your life that you don't forget. Sticks in your mind forever.
I liked how you ended it with the questions. Did we? Because then you, as the reader, you know, yeah, you did. That was a unique, great way to end it. I like that.
Yeah. Those are called rhetorical questions. The answer is yes or no, depending on like how stupid is that. But you're presenting something that we can obviously all say yes to. I think the most profound thing that she said that I would love to see her work with again as she gets to the end of this. At the very beginning, she talked about being directionally challenged. But at the end, she made a statement about we found our way. And it seems to me that that is a big, really big theme that goes way beyond even the trip to Europe. That somehow in the midst of this adventure, something turned, and although they might have gotten, she may still be directionally challenged, I don't know, but she has found her way. And I think that could be even worked with at the very end in your conclusion to greater focus. Now that would just be my take on things, but I do think that is a really key line to the whole of your story. I like it, yeah, I mean, it's got great imagery. All those things that they did in preparation, I mean, it's well done, so. How many of you have traveled like that? Sam, you have.
No,
I have. Have you, Meredith?
No.
I traveled to Washington DC and back,
That's it?
When I think about
Montana.
myself, when I graduated from high school, I had no idea what I was gonna do. Everybody just guided me. I think they realized I was,
You had no sense of direction.
Well, I just was, what am I gonna do?
Okay.
I was kind of curious about what you and the conversation on the plane and elaborating on that could be a whole, you know, it was probably 20 hours on a plane. Maybe not just that one, you know, but that whole getting there.
Yeah, she had, that's about where I started making a couple of notes about it. But I think, yeah, I mean, that experience is that in of itself is kind of a micro moment of your travels.
I have to admit, I'm writing short.
Yeah.
So that I can.
Yeah, so you can kind of
Yeah, so that you can actually get.
get it through. And I mean, but you could start, you have something to start from and then elaborate with. But I do think that, yeah, I mean, I like the fact that you are extremely succinct. It really cuts to the chase. And if you'll notice, she doesn't, I suspect, have a whole lot of inactive verbs. There's a lot of action that goes on, and that makes a big difference in how quickly you get through a piece. So, okay, so where are we? Are we on? Jim, do you want to read your piece for today, or do you want to read the one you had from last week that we didn't have time for?
Well, probably I would read the one from last week.
Okay. Yeah, this was quite an adventure.
I'll read it as I wrote it, and of course I won't incorporate your comments.
No, that's confusing.
I have experienced several events in my career and in my family life that stick in my mind. Some have influenced my life and career, I'm sure. Some, though, were events that just stuck in my mind as they are unforgettable. One of those was an event that comes to mind every time I drive through Shell Canyon on Highway 14. In December of 1970, I was in my first year of my career with the U.S. Forest Service assigned to the Paint Rock District of the Bighorn National Forest. I graduated from forestry school that spring and had spent the summer supervising a fire crew out in Grable. The district had settled into the winter routine of reports and planning, and Roger Williams, the district wildlife and range specialist, asked if I wanted to assist him in conducting a browse utilization study on mule deer and winter range in Shell Canyon. That was something new to me, so I eagerly agreed. I traveled to the lower reaches of Shell Canyon and parked the truck at Post Creek Picnic Ground. Turned out about 25 miles east of Grable. The terrain was steep and rocky, but there was very little snow. We had little trouble getting around to conduct survey measurements. We spent a couple hours measuring browse utilization on curl leaf mahogany, then returned to the truck for lunch. Finishing his lunch, Roger said, I told the pastor at church I would get them a Christmas tree. There should be some good ones here. I threw a bow saw in the back. So I agreed to help him find a tree and get it back to the truck, so we went out scouting for a suitable tree. The terrain in the canyon is steep. The south side of the canyon where we were is characterized by a series of benches with cliffs 25 to 30 feet high, flanked by boulder outcrops. The benches were actually 20 to 40% sloping ground with rocky soils and sparsely vegetated with scattered mahogany and Douglas fir saplings. There are a series of these benches leading up to the base of the massive main canyon walls. Finding no suitable Christmas tree on the lower slopes where we were, we decided to climb up onto the first bench. Skirting the cliff areas, we wound our way up through the first outcrops onto the bench. We hadn't gone far traversing the slope when I sighted a good-looking 8-foot Douglas fir ahead. I pointed it out to Roger, who was about 40 feet upslope from me. Would that one do? I yelled. Yeah, let's get a closer look, he responded. As I approached the tree, I discovered there was an ice chute between me and the tree. This ice chute was about 4 feet wide and ran all the way from the rock cliff above us down to the rock outcropping about 50 yards below where I was. Obviously, this was a spring. There was a spring up there somewhere. This ice chute looked to be good enough for a perfect bobsled run. On the other side of the ice stood the targeted Christmas tree. I found a spot where I could leap across the ice and position myself at the edge of the chute at the base of the tree. I was carrying the saw, so I was ready to cut it down if Roger was satisfied with it. Roger was about 40 feet above me on the slope. I just started to tell him to watch out for the ice when he hollered, "Watch out, here I come." I looked up and there came Roger, sliding down the chute on his back. His coattails were flapping and he had the look of terror on his face. I quickly wrapped my right arm around the tree and I held the bow saw out over the ice, thinking he could grab it and I could roll him out of the chute. "Grab the saw," I shouted. But as he zipped by me, he ignored it, saying something like he didn't want to pull me in after him. I helplessly watched as he slid down the chute, hoping he would roll over and grab something or roll out of the chute. 50 yards below, he disappeared around a rock outcrop. This was not good. Working below before lunch, we had commented on the cliffs and the ruggedness of the terrain. My immediate thought was he was dead. No way he could survive what I pictured in my mind. Cautiously, I jumped across the ice and frantically worked my way down the slope to where I had seen him disappear. Finding myself on the edge of a precipice, I peered over and saw Roger lying on his back in a rocky talus pile. He had been launched off of a 25-foot cliff. His velocity had carried him about 25 feet out from the base of that cliff. "Hey, are you okay?" I shouted. He moaned and raised his hand slightly. He was alive. It took me about 20 minutes to find the way down off the bench and over to him. He was conscious but barely able to talk. He couldn't move, and I was sure I didn't want to try to move him, even though he was lying in a bed of rocks. A back injury could be made worse if he wasn't moved properly. He had a knot on the back of his head and had blood on his hands from scratches and scrapes, but there was no evidence of significant blood loss. I took off my brand new Forest Service winter parka and covered him the best I could. We quickly agreed that we had to get help. Although we had a radio in the truck, there was no communication signal in the canyon. So assuring Roger I would get right back, I headed down the slope with the truck to get to a telephone. About 4 miles down the canyon at the canyon mouth, I found at the Wagon Wheel Lodge and called the district office. District Ranger Hank Bond caught on quick to the urgency of the situation and assured me he would gather what would be necessary to get Roger off the mountain. With some blankets borrowed from the lodge, I returned to the postscript. Roger was still conscious when I got back to him, and he was glad to get the blankets. And I admitted it was good for me to get my parka back on, as it was getting late in the day, and the canyon was getting cold. Roger was in a lot of pain and confident his back was broken. Keeping him as comfortable as possible, I gave him sips of water from the canteen and kept him talking, worried about him losing consciousness. About an hour after my phone was called, Hank arrived with the ambulance and about 5 men. With some difficulty, they got the backboard under Roger and lifted him into a litter. Taking turns carrying, we got him down the slope to the ambulance. Roger spent a long stretch in the hospital and several months in recovery, but came out a very lucky man. He lived out a long career with the outfit. The church didn't get their Christmas tree, but I learned something about measuring mule deer utilization on their curly mahogany and that water spraying from the cliffs and benches in Shell Canyon.
What a traumatic.
When you were describing that canyon, I could see it. I graduated from Tinsley. Spent a lot of time in Tinsley Canyon, and I could visualize exactly what that looked like. You did a really good job describing it. Wonderful job.
Pretty typical of that side of the mountain, you know.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
it's
very
important,
typical.
it's an important set of details for us before we get to the story. Without that, we wouldn't understand just how desperate the circumstances might have been. So yeah, it's really well done and it's really necessary.
Yeah. When you introduced the ice chute, I thought, uh-oh, somebody's going down that ice chute.
Foreshadowing.
Yeah, they're good for, yeah, it was really foreshadowing.
Bobsled.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty interesting location there. I'll be
So-
interested in seeing your comments on it.
So are there other comments or thoughts about what you heard him read what did you like? What was most memorable for you besides the adventure of it? Was there anything in particular that you had questions about or?
Well, if you've been through the canyon, you can picture it exactly.
I wondered if at the beginning when he said, "Here I come," if he was going to enjoy going down, if he almost wanted to go down, and then it was obvious he didn't want to go down that. When it said, "Here I come," I could just see him, taking a quick trip down there to join you, and then when you were panicked, then I realized he wasn't looking forward to this, this shortcut down the mountain.
I like the idea of the Christmas tree tied in with it, and tying it up with something a little lighter than the life and death situation,
But it
the
gives
main
you,
part of the story.
for me, it gives you a picture of the time of the year if you're going to looking for a Christmas tree.
It's a wonder he survived.
Yeah.
Shooting out 25 foot off
That
of
was shocking.
that bench to go down on the next bench. Wow.
I wanted to come back to what Frank just said though, that I think is really useful to think about. When you write something, that the humor helps to alleviate the pressure. If you do nothing but hammer your thumb, it does not work. He had this dramatic moment, and then he gives a little breathing space with that reminder about the Christmas tree, and then the fact that there's a side of it that's an element of almost practicality in the midst of that, despite all of the awful stuff, and even the kind of the silly thing about the Christmas tree, we come back to what he did as a profession in that moment. I mean, it was a kind of a nice tie-in by putting that in at the end. Yeah,
I want to say too, because just knowing the other stories that he has of that part of the mountain, and he was in the hot shots and Grable, and
Yeah.
my mom was run into with a snowplow at one point. Just those stories could make one book with what he's got. And I think there's
That's
a
pretty
picture
obvious.
of that Jeep with my brother and sister maybe, or maybe it was just my sister and them on the side of the mountain there. And was that where you were on the ranger station over there too?
So here we have a person who's got the story to write too.
That's why I'm inserting it, because
I'm not talking about Jim. I'm talking about Danica over here has her own set of stories that she could be writing. I was going to mention some details though with just your writing. If it's a Christmas season, and you're in a canyon, the window of time and the shadows and the temperature dropping. He mentions the temperature change, but I would have liked to have had a little bit more sense, because when he described taking 20 minutes to get from where he was on one side of that chute to the other to get down to where his working partner was, then you think about I wondered how long did it take, time-wise maybe, to get from the body where this man had fallen down to the truck, because in actual fact, as you described it, man, that seems almost really fast. I mean, how did you, an element of the time frame, and then by the time you got back, where you might describe like the shadows had already closed over, he was already in the shadows of the sun. Something that would describe the terrain as a consequence of the season, in addition to the environment that we can visualize. Because that has a lot to do with the tension of this story as well. It's a very dangerous time because of how cold it is, or could get, even though it was warm enough that it wasn't. but like what time you left and then how long it took you to get back, those kinds
Yeah.
of trivia.
Did they
see-
have like headlamps when they're coming down the mountain at that point, you know?
Just the general environment in general.
Yeah, I
The
think-
weather and the conditions were, it could be more clearly explained, I think.
Yeah,
People from around here probably recognize what it was probably like that time of day, you know.
and I guess the question would be, was that area, was it fairly open, that it was fairly open that winter, so there wasn't a ton of snow on the ground when you were walking. But the temperatures would be a factor for this whole, so you don't have to give an inordinate amount of information, but just that sense of timing in regard to how dangerous that the cold can become. That, and the other question I did have personally had to do with getting down off that hill. You had 5 men that had come with the ambulance, the guy that was your supervisor and you said we took turns. And I would have liked to have known just a little bit how that taking turns looked like. Did you swap out, give somebody a break? Was there somebody that was always at the head? Stuff like that. That might be some stuff to think about with that story. Because it's a dramatic moment and no doubt will be a very life-turning event. So,
Just in general, and when I look back and addressing any of these assignments, it comes to mind small events that are a part of the whole story. That,
yes.
like when I write from my dad, for instance, what I did for today, this speaks to a certain part of it, but you could write a whole book about just him and how it relates to me and my family, you know. And so there's a whole bunch that could be written, but picking up on specific events, sooner or later, if you did them all, then it would come together for a complete story.
And I hope that will be the function of the prompts that I've given you, that maybe, like Lois is deliberately keeping it short, but if you look at the possibility of writing more with what you have, these prompts can be a tool to keep writing, not just about what we're writing and sharing today or, in these days, but that you can just keep compiling it, that there's more there that you would be willing to try. And, that's one of the benefits of coming together and sharing this, is it's an incentive. So Clarence and I don't want to, I really hate skipping, so I'm just like trying to hurry and get these done. But Gladys, do you have one that you want to share? And then Clarence, do you have one that we can hear?
Yeah, I could read what I wrote this week,
Okay. And
because
then,
I'd read the other one before.
If not, you can have mine.
yeah, and I was gonna say, if you have ones that you did not get to share, I just make sure your names are on them and then give them in, and I will make sure that I have a chance to read them and give you critique back on them if we don't have time for everybody to be heard. So that's the time frame. If we talk about it, then we lose time for reading, but that's the whole idea. So Clarence, do you want to read next, and then Gladys?
I started high school in the fall of 1949 in Buffalo. I was in a class of about 50 students, an overwhelming experience. I drove to pick up the school hall milk to the creamery for the neighborhood. There were about 6 to 8 10-gallon cans. I would leave the milk before school and pick up the empties after school. The creamery was where the First National Bank is today. They bottled milk, churned butter, made cottage cheese and ice cream. About the time we got out of school, the dasher would be coming out of the ice cream freezer, which was about the size of a 55-gallon drum. They would give us spoons and let us scrape off ice cream. While in high school, agriculture and FFA were my main interest. I was obsessed about learning to weld, which was to become a big part of my life. I did not play sports in high school. There were chores to do at home. I won an all-expense-paid trip to the National FFA convention for myself and the instructor. The award was from the Sears and Roebuck for soil conservation. The trip was to Kansas City, my first time to ride a train from Sheridan and the first time to see television. Beside my father, the most influential person in my life was the ag instructor, Mr. John Driscoll. He was a former Army officer and kept that personality. He was a big man, at least 6 feet tall, with a great posture. He was a man of few words, but they meant something. I graduated from Johnson County High School in May of 1953, Philip Mills, a classmate, and I caught a bus to Butte, Montana to join the Navy the next day. The Korean War was on. A high school graduate could expect to be drafted within 2 years of graduation. I chose the Navy to get my service behind me and was fortunate enough to learn a trade. I spent 4 years in the Navy and considered it a positive experience. After boot camp in San Diego, I was sent to Great Lakes Training Center for 3 months machinist mate school. In March of 1954, I caught the USS Seminole, aka 104, at Hunters Point, California, my home for the next 37 months. The Seminole was an attack cargo ship. We hauled cargo to places like Pearl Harbor, Japan, and Korea. The ship was my home. I always had a roof over my head, a place to sleep, and a place to eat. To my knowledge, we were never in any military danger, maybe some weather. In March of '57, I was transferred to the USS APD, the USS Cook APD 103, awaiting discharge, May 23rd, 1950. When I was discharged from active duty, I had attained the rank of machinist mate first class in 4 years. I caught a bus from San Diego to Rollins and hitchhiked to Buffalo. In June of 1957, I went to work in a little sawmill located on Bear Trap in the Bighorn Mountains. The mill was owned by a family friend, Lawrence Flegel. I worked there from June until November. The fishing was really good in Bear Trap. In November of 1957, I and a neighbor, Dean Fernicase, caught a train to St. Louis. We were enrolled in Bailey Technical School, studying diesel and automotive mechanics. This course was a year long. I was hired to teach about a month before I graduated and worked for the school for about a year. In 1959, I took the job as a mechanic for Sperry Rail Service. Sperry Rail Service was a contractor that tested the metal in the rails for various railroads. They had about a dozen test cars scattered about the U.S. and Canada. The test cars were full-size rail cars with the equipment on board to test the rails. The operating crew plus a cook lived on the car. A mechanic and electrician traveled in the service truck and went around the cars to repair the cars that were needed. I was responsible for 5 cars located west of the Mississippi and 1 in Canada. We worked 7 days a week. That got a week off with pay. I was flown home to Buffalo for the week off and went back to work. All our expenses were paid, motels, meals, and laundry. With the exception of weekends, we were seldom spent 2 nights in one place. The first year I worked there, I was in 30 states and 5 provinces of Canada. We spent the winters, January, February, and March in St. Paul, working in a railroad shop. I worked for Sperry for 3 years. In June of '62, I came back to Wyoming.
Covered a lot.
In August of '62, I went to work for a local contractor, Al Reeves, as a mechanic welder. Reeves was moving the dirt for the interstate tri-level north of Buffalo. The machinery was old and required many repairs. In 1963, I spent a few months living in Antelope Junction, working on missile-based roads. In 1964, Reeves had a dirt job between Meeteetse and Cody, about June to September. I lived in Meeteetse. It snowed in July. It took a lot of work to keep the old machinery running. In the fall of 1964, I moved to Chugwater, where we were graveling missile-based roads. In October of '64, we moved to Newcastle, where we graveled some roads in the Clareton area. I spent the winter in Newcastle where I met the woman that I was later to marry. And that's as far as I got this week.
Okay, real quickly, were there any details that you would like to suggest that he develop as he looks back at what he's written?
I would like more details on what life was like on those ships, where, where you lived on one for 3 years, what the daily routine was, what you did on the
Oh,
ship.
yeah, there'd be a lot of them.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's a good
I mean, but
point.
that would be
That
interesting
would
to
be
your descendants, how you lived on the ship, what you did, what your entertainment was, how you lived with the men, what your bunk was like.
Yeah.
I could see
Yeah.
that being,
That's almost another story.
yeah, I
Yeah.
could see it being another story,
Yeah,
but
and
it
then I-
would be
yeah.
very interesting.
Yeah,
Because the other part of that same part that I was curious about, and if you've been in the Navy, you probably know this, but he said the biggest danger was the weather.
Yeah,
I would have liked to have known, like, the worst storm or,
Yeah.
yeah, that would be
because
interesting
there would
too.
be some, I'm sure.
one time we took a 65-degree roll.
Oh,
But
Lord.
we came back.
And so those are the kind of details about the experiences there that you could
Oh,
blow
yeah,
out.
that's another book.
And then the other one that I was curious about is, I don't care what you've done in your life. When you teach school, it's different. I would love to have known a little bit about when you said you came home after having been, you were a working man, then you went back into the school and you taught for a year. I'd be interested in having you, elaborate on that distinction a little bit more. That one also is, a different track.
Yeah,
So you could develop some of that. So
oh,
Edie,
yeah, there's no end.
there is no end, but there might be some way
Yeah.
of elaborating. Yeah.
And then-
Heather?
Were you still working for Al Reeves all this time?
Uh-huh.
Okay, well,
After I got back,
yeah, well, when you said you went to the different places.
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
You might insert there, still working for Al Reeves.
yeah, he was a contractor.
Yeah, and he was a big enough contractor that he sent you a lot of places.
Yeah,
That's also, it's like working for Kiewit or, the big the Riverside outfits now. I mean, those are the
Yeah.
kind of places that he sort of had that kind of reputation.
I was wondering, when Cody, were you part of the tunnel building or anything there then, around
no,
there?
no, we always worked on roads.
Just
Yeah.
That's a whole special thing. Okay, Gladys, we're gonna give you a minute and we'll give you some time and then you can give me what you don't have a chance to finish with, okay?
Okay. As I look back over, now, my eyes are giving me trouble, so I may have,
Do you want someone else to read it for you? Would that help? Okay. All right. Of course, I don't have to be at the
I can
one.
help you enlarge it too, like we did with Dave,
well,
if
I
you ever
put it
need
in
help.
14 print,
Yeah,
but
she,
now
yeah,
sometimes.
but her eyes today went.
Yeah.
Most influential person. As soon as I look back over the many people who have influenced my life's journey, one person stands out. It is my mother, Lydia Jacobson. Mother influenced many areas of my life. Perhaps the most emphasized one was the importance of education. This was most likely, it came from her own education experiences. As child farm work was more important than school. When farm work was done, then you went to school. Mom told me that she sat down once and figured out how many days she actually went to school. It would have amounted to 2 years, or finishing the 2nd grade. Yet, she finished the 8th grade, able to do math faster than the teacher. I was taught to play cribbage to help me add numbers quickly. She always made sure our homework was done. Reading was also important, so in the summer we made weekly trips to the county library. I ended up acquiring a bachelor's degree and 2 masters. My siblings' accomplishments is another story. Church was an integral part of my upbringing. Sunday school, church, youth group, activities, summer camps. First it was at Camp Wyoba on Casper Mountain, then it was Camp Bethel and Highway 14 west of Dayton near Lake Sibley. I looked forward to those camps every summer, especially Camp Bethel. Kids came from Sheridan, Cody, Lovell, Powell, Jackson, Grable, Basin, and Worland. We looked forward to seeing our friends from other towns at camp. During my high school years, we had Labor Day retreats in various towns of the kids who came to camp. Gardening was another area that we were taught. In summer, pick strawberries, pull rhubarb, pick currants, both red and white ones, from the patches growing north of the house. She made juice to be canned or made into jelly. Fall brought chokecherries, picking and putting tarps under buffalo berry bushes to catch the berries when you shook the bushes. These were also juiced and made into jellies. Canning was also a very necessary activity to make sure there was food for winter. Chicken, deer, meat, and elk, if Dad was lucky enough to be able to shoot one, were canned. This was before the days of deep freezers. When Dad was able to purchase one of the first freezers in Buffalo, meat and vegetables were frozen as well as canned. Learning to sew on the old treadle sewing machine, cut out items of clothing to be sewn, blouses, dresses, shirts for the boys, was another area of importance to me. I was also taught to crochet and tat. Mom crocheted and tatted mostly from looking at pictures. I have 3 cherished tatted doilies she made for me. Mom only knew how to cast on and knit stitch. I was instructed to have one of the ladies I worked for show me to purl stitch. Mom had a small business. She sold extra eggs, chickens occasionally, and lots of extra vegetables, especially corn. We learned how to pick corn, know which ones were ready. She also sold extra cream to the local creamery, which was located where Bob Edwards' electric shop was, and is now a beauty shop. Mom's change was kept in the sugar bowl in the cupboard. Any bill over $1 was put under the linoleum shelf liner on the second shelf. When Dad sold the house after Mom died, they checked the shelf to see what was there. I was told they found about $900 in bills. I think she didn't remember just how much she had tucked away up there. Another attribute I learned was giving and doing for others without expecting something in return. Give and it will be given to you, heaped up, pressed down, and running over. I have experienced this in my life over and over again. When Mom had reaped all she wanted from the garden, she would call a lady who had a large family and tell her to come and clean the garden. This kindness was paid back to me years later in different ways. Kindness and sharing what you know never goes unrewarded.
That's nice.
It's really a nice tribute.
Yeah.
So I'm going to keep it and I'll make some comments on it. But
It's on my computer, so you can mark it up the way you want.
So comments about what were the things that you appreciated in what she said?
Well, I didn't put it in there, but I can go with Clarence. We were poor people, and
we didn't hardly know it.
That's what I
Everybody
said.
else was in the same boat.
Well, that's what I said. We never associated with anybody that's rich, so we didn't know the difference.
Well, there were 9 of us, and every now and then a box of clothing would appear on the doorstep. And I'm not sure, I know sometimes where it came from, sometimes I don't. But we would take it, and Mother would tell us to very carefully rip it apart. She'd wash it, press it, and then cut it and make us things out of it. So we always looked well dressed because she was able to do all of this.
Yep.
And
And that's a detail that you might want to include in this as you go. That detail about it makes me think of that Dolly Parton song about the coat of many colors.
Yeah.
That whole idea that, you don't have to be.
well, I remember one year, this lady had given Mother a gold colored suit and blouse. And she made it down so I could wear it. And I put it on and she said, "Do you feel all right?" And I discovered that I cannot wear yellow. It just takes all my color and makes me look like I'm yellow.
So that was not for you. Well, I'm going to ask the rest of you, are there comments or things that you appreciated or that you would suggest that you work on in this piece?
I think she could expand on all of it, like she talks about sewing on the treadle sewing machine. What were you, and I know what it's like with the treadle machine when you have to get the rhythm going and keep it going. And what were you making? Were you making quilts? Were you making clothing? That time, I think all of it could be expanded and all of it would be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, when you were talking about canning meat, I, to this day, do not like boiling beef. And my mother and my grandmother that's how they cooked their ribs. they took all the beef and they would boil the ribs and they would stick them in cans. And to this day, it's one of my least favorite things. I don't know why, but it's just because everything when that was the method of cooking. It's everything boiled food.
Mother always just cut it in chunks and put it in, and then didn't put anything on it or anything, just
Yeah.
sealed it up and put it through the pressure canner.
Yeah, that's pretty much what my mom did. It didn't have any flavor whatsoever.
Well, but I have done that and take it out and then make a gravy on it, season, make gravy on it. And my family liked it.
Yeah.
It was never boiled. It went raw into the jar,
That's the difference.
and that makes a difference.
Well, and those are the kind of details that can
Yeah,
be the
yeah.
significant components. Okay, well, I'm gonna have to, we're out of time, it's 3:30. Meredith, I would really like you to have, because it's not very, it's a little long, but can you read the second part of your grandmother's story about the basement canning?
Do you want
Like
like
that
the
one.
second basement?
Yeah, the second, this is about her grandmother's basement, and I wanted her to
Okay,
hear it.
Yeah,
because this is-
I had two grandmothers and they both canned a lot and they had huge basements just full of stuff. They called it put and buy. This is my maternal grandmother. Grandmother Laurel Purcell Funk was widowed a year before I was born. Even though she lived alone, her garden also rivaled my grandmother DeSoto's. It had all the basic necessities planted, just like Grandma DeSoto's, but also included a long row of raspberries and a huge square of strawberries. There was no special room in her basement, but a long row of shelves running the entire length of one wall in the basement built by my father for her. Row upon row of home canned goods crammed the shelves. Just like I did at my other grandmother's home, I would sneak down to this grandmother's basement. There I could run my finger down the shelves, admiring all the colorful canned jars. It was a satisfying feeling viewing them, and I found comfort in this. Unlike my Grandma DeSoto's basement, though, Grandma Funk's basement was more a utilitarian affair. Her bare cement walls and floors had a walkout door on the north wall. In the northeast corner was her laundry, a Maytag Wringer washer, wash tubs for rinsing, and baskets to take the laundry out, where it was hung on a 3-line clothesline running the length of her garden along a path running down the middle. One of my Grandma Funk's specialties was pickled crab apples, picked from the tree she had just for that particular delicacy. Her crab apples were about the size of a golf ball. I never saw crab apples that big after moving to Wyoming. She also canned ground cherry jam every year, my favorite jam. When I began gardening as an adult, she would send me jam every year and some seeds for ground cherries, which she had carefully saved from her garden. I was never able to get them to even germinate. I think Wyoming was not humid enough. Maybe they whispered to the other seeds, "Do not pump up. This is zone 3A." Grandma Funk also produced many a holiday family meal or Sunday dinner for her family. She would share all of her canning labors with the family. My mother never gardened, never home canned, yet every year we would have a lot of canned goods to eat at our house, all from my grandmother Funk. One of my favorites was her homemade ketchup. It tasted nothing like store-bought ketchup. Hers was fragrant with cinnamon, nutmeg, and other spices. As an adult, I asked for the recipe, and Grandma handed me an index card and told me to go copy it from the recipe book in the top drawer of her kitchen. When I found the recipe book, I noticed it was dated 1918, the year she was married. I still make that ketchup, but usually I buy a number 10 can of tomato sauce to start the recipe rather than preparing raw tomatoes. Neither grandmother had the opportunity to teach me how to home can, as by the time I was old enough to learn, I was in Wyoming 1,000 miles away. Rather, that task fell to my mother-in-law, who showed me how to put up pears and peaches in 1979. I have home canned something every single year since then and continue to do so every year. Some years, when I worked full-time, it might have only been a few dozen jars of a single recipe. If I had more time, I canned over 200 jars of various foods. I garden every year. Tucked in one corner of my current garden is a tub of sunny orange marigold flowers. I always think of my grandmother DeSoto when I water them. She had those. Once I mentioned to one of my cousins, Dawn Funk, that I felt guilty if I did not home can at least 50 jars of food. Dawn laughed and said, "Me too." We decided we were the products of our grandmothers who believed in putting up every year. A lesson we learned from our grandmother's basements. It's probably a common experience with
Well, I didn't really,
most of us.
I will continue, there are a couple of comments on there, but I wanted you to hear it in conjunction with all of these things that you guys have shared about.
Well, we had two different places that we, first it was one corner of the basement, and then there was a special room for it.
Well, but I think the thing that I wanted you to hear is this image, row upon row of canned goods cramming the shelves. I would run my finger down the shelves admiring all the colorful jars. That, to me, I thought it really captures, if you've ever seen canned spaces, canned areas where people can, it is colorful. And I don't know if you have ever read a book called Dandelion Wine, but if you haven't, you should.
Okay.
It's a wonderful, it was written by Ray Bradbury, and it is a wonderful story about a coming of age one summer. It technically is semi-autobiographical of Ray Bradbury in Ohio.
Okay.
It is but Dandelion Wine is about the wine that his grandfather puts up every day when they go out and collect the dandelions. And it is just a charming story, but I just thought you capture that sense of the space. So, Danica, I'm sorry. I'm kind of going
Just
over,
one
but-
thought, because what I picture in my head is the bare walls, basically earthen walls in the basement as opposed to the cement, and how dark it might be and damp and.
Yeah.
But it's a comforting feeling almost, the old
Well, I
root
think I
cellar
got
type.
comfort from it because all my aunts and uncles would talk about during the Depression and their kids and how hard times were. And I'd go down, I'm like 5 years old, and I'd go down and look at all these canned goods, and I'd think, well, by God, Grandma's not gonna let us starve.
Yep, you're safe and sound. Yeah, it's comforting, that being able to provide for yourself now too.
Yeah.
And we didn't have time for me to read the piece that Sam has done about his grandmother, but Sam, do you want me to save it and to read it next time?
Sure.
Yeah.
But anyway, you guys have done some amazing stuff. I just have a great time listening to all of the things you're writing. And so I'm trying to keep track of the people who read today. And so then next week we'll try and flip it around. So, or not next week, but next time we meet, okay?
Oh, yeah, next week is
Next
Good
week is
Friday, so we're
Easter.
not here.
It's Good Friday, so.
Oh, okay, yeah, I got that marked on my calendar.
Oh, it's at the shortest one.
I have this one that I did it on.
And this one.
Clarence, I
of the
wanted
Wolf
to ask, your
family.
last name's
Okay.
Bishop, right?
Yeah,
Maybe
Are
that
you
one I could
related
do
to
the
Everett and
education.
Judy Bishop over by
Yeah.
Gillette?
yeah, Everett's my
Every one of
brother.
us has that.
Oh my gosh, I've known Everett and Judy
Out of
for
9
years. Our
minutes.
kids went to State Fair and stuff was where I met Judy.
Oh, yeah, she's always in that.
Yeah, I'll be darned. I wondered, because when you talked about your little brother Everett being born, I thought, oh my God, he
That's
must be his
funny.
brother.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah. They was up here last Saturday.
were they?
Yeah,
I haven't seen them for years.
Yeah, so,
yeah.
and so Frank, are you working on fiction? Or are you working on nonfiction pieces for these stories? Are you still doing kind of your story for yourself or?
Pretty much for myself.
Okay, so did you write something for today?
I did, but this was a really hard assignment.
So do you want, you don't have to share it with your group, but do you want me to read it? Or do you want to just keep it?
No, I'll just keep it.
Okay. All right.
You know, Earl's here working in a computer store.
In Buffalo?
Yeah,
Really? I didn't know that.
yeah.
This,
I'll have to go stop by and see him
Yeah.
one of these times I'm
That's
up
my
here.
favorite.
No, I thought I knew he was working in computer store, but I thought he was working in Gillette.
No, he's been here several years.
Degrees that.
He kind of looks after me if I need help.
Okay.
Well, I'll go see Earl. I wonder if
Well,
he'll
you might
even
just
remember.
identify
He
who
was
they are
probably,
And, you know, a little bit of background.
oh, maybe
each one of
12,
them, they're in the
13 last
sequence.
time I saw
Maybe you're
him.
gonna talk about your
I would
project.
expect you would, but who knows?
Yeah, who knows?
I never, I only met my grandparents. I never.
So,
Yeah, and
got
so
to
that's,
really know
you
them.
write about who you know, that's all there you can do. But I just,
I didn't
each
know
one of
that.
you has something.
You know, I always had to come down. and have it. You know, I bought it.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
But
like I said,
anyway, I bought
here's another here, so-
I'll check those and this I wanted you to see. I had somebody help me and we.
I really
Yes, I saw
enjoyed
you
listening
brought
to
that
their
last
stories.
week, yeah, noticing that
Yeah.
I drove by there today, it was
Yeah,
looking for that one.
years having.
No, it's not
there
there now, but I was thinking about it since I drove by there.
In high school, I could
But this is not
visualize
the same.
exactly.
No, it's